I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about sentence typology when studying Greek. It really matters when you start reading more complex texts. Important to be able to see the structure and the syntax. Um, but we're thinking in terms of certain fundamental patterns that are used in the Greek language. And there's really only six or so major building blocks in terms of sentence typology. And underneath that, we do have some nuances and some shades. But in terms of really the skeleton of what you're looking at with sentence typology, you're really looking at these as as the core, the foundation of all sentences that are found in Greek. Uh, I suppose if one were to summarize the Greek language in comparison to English, we would say English is a subject-verb-object oriented language. Whereas if ancient Greek has a default, it would be subject, object, verb in that order. But of course, we see actually all of these, and so that's one of the what's one of the peculiarities of Greek is that these sentences will move around in these forms, and you will see them all expressed. And and so, just want to mention a few things around this. So, the first major sentence structure, which of course is the prototypical sentence for the English speakers, is subject, verb, object, and that makes sense to us immediately. And then there's the subject verb, which is very simple. And when a native speaker hears a subject verb sentence, they know intuitively whether that particular verb takes a direct object or not. So if we were to say John coughed does not take an object, and it's intuitive for the reader, it's intuitive for the speaker. And then we have something interesting that arises with the copulative to be verbs, where these verbs do not take objects. What they take are subject complements. And so that's why you have an SVSC sentence type. And as you're reading Greek text, you kind of have to learn to ask yourself, what is the basic sentence type? And when you're doing this, you need to be able to distinguish the obligatory components from the non-obligatory components. What do I mean by that? I mean that you have a basic sentence that has added to it all kinds of modifiers, and those modifiers are modifying the obligatory components. And so you have to strip the sentence down to its basic structure, and then you learn to separate this out from the non-obligatory modifiers, which serve to add flavor and context to the matrix sentence. And so if you look at, for example, the first sentence in the Gospel of Luke, or you look at the Epistle to Diognetus, it's a good example of a complex sentence with a lot of non-obligatory components that you have to strip away to see that the matrix sentence structure. And what you have in these sentences are actually, these complex sentences are embedded clauses within matrix clauses, which makes it difficult to read if you do not learn to look for the basic sort of sentence structure. So when we talk about parts of speech, you can define what a noun is or an adjective, but there are other things that don't fit this category but can function in this way. So, for example, the object of a verb can be a noun, but you can also see a whole clause functioning as the object. And when this happens, linguists use words with the suffix -al. So, for example, adjectival, adverbial, nominal, and they do that in order to clarify that the phrase that's being used grammatically is not strictly an adjective or an adverb, but rather it's functioning like an adjective or an adverb. And so you will see that in terms of you'll see whole clauses that are functioning in this way, adjectively or adverbially or nominally. Supplementary participles are actually a good example of this, where you have embedded content within matrix sentences, or you have obligatory components modifying. You have non-obligatory components modifying obligatory components, where you have embedded sentences within matrix sentences, But the embedded sentences also have their own sentence typology. The amazing thing is you really only have 6 building blocks for sentences, which you see here, um, but they're used with almost infinite variety because you can have a clause within a clause within a clause. You can go 3 or 4 levels deep, and you can have frills and other non-obligatory components which add flavor and context to the matrix clause. And this is what makes reading so enjoyable, by the way. I mean, for example, one of the things, reading would be boring by itself if we didn't have all these non-obligatory components, these frills that add all the flavor. And it's the frills, it's these things that make the content interesting, even though it actually becomes harder to read grammatically or syntactically. So you have to learn how to get rid of all the frills and see the basic components if you want to read syntactically, both at the matrix level and at the embedded sentence level. And one of the things that we do in language is we provide tools or models for trying to understand what we're looking at. And since no model is perfect, it only provides for us a basic structure or framework for understanding, but the tools, even though they have limitations, are extremely useful. And we'll become better readers by utilizing this tool of sentence typology. And what we're trying to do is analyze the Greek material on its own, which aids us in our understanding. So at a later time, I'll break this down, give some examples of some of these various sentences in terms of sentence typology, but you want to learn how to read Greek in terms of thinking about it in light of sentence typology. And that will help significantly as you get into more difficult and complex sentences.